You know, usually when we look at a map, there's this underlying assumption of just absolute trust.
Right. Yeah. You just believe it.
Exactly. You look at the lines, you read the names of the cities, and you just inherently believe that, north is north, south is south.
And the roads go where they say they go.
Right. We rely on that shared reality to just, navigate our world. But imagine someone hands you that exact same map, the one you've used your entire life to understand human history.
Okay.
And they tell you that you've been holding it upside down this whole time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And not only that, they tell you the names of the cities are actually like a complex cipher, and the roads you thought led to safety actually lead to intellectual captivity.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is, because when you realize the map is upside down, you don't just put it away, You have to completely relearn how to walk.
Yeah, and the danger of any shared reality is that it's entirely built on linguistic consensus.
Right. Words mean things because we agree they mean things.
Exactly. But if the foundation of that consensus was manipulated centuries ago, then, well, every conclusion drawn from it is fundamentally flawed.
Which is terrifying, honestly.
It is. And that cognitive reset is really the core mechanism of the framework we are exploring today on this deep dive.
Yes, the framework developed by Dr. Khaled Waleed.
Right. Because he is basically taking the map of ancient history, theology, and linguistics and just completely discarding the accepted legend.
Like throwing it out the window.
Exactly. We're looking at ancient scriptures and Quranic verses entirely through the lens of his philosophy today.
A philosophy that deliberately rejects and totally rewrites the traditional historical narratives, right?
Yes, specifically regarding ancient Israelites, Arabs, and these deeply entrenched biblical figures.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because as we step into this framework, we really need to establish a very clear perimeter for you listening.
Yeah, a disclaimer is definitely needed here.
For sure. The texts and concepts Dr. Waleed presents contain some highly charged historical and theological views.
Very charged.
And our role today as guides on this deep dive is not to endorse, validate, or, debate the morality of these views.
Right. We're not taking sides or saying this is absolute historical fact.
Not at all. We are operating strictly as impartial guides. We're just examining and decoding the architecture of what Dr. Waleed calls the covenant of subservience and sovereignty.
Exactly as he wrote it.
Yeah.
We're just looking at the mechanics of his argument.
Which brings up the big question, right? What if the ancient stories and words we thought we knew were completely mistranslated or conceptually flipped?
I mean, language acts as the operating system of human thought.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. So by altering the definitions of foundational words, Dr. Waleed completely alters the reality built upon them.
So where do we even begin this roadmap?
Well, to understand how he executes this massive historical inversion, we have to start exactly where he starts.
Which is?
The infancy of belief.
Oh, wow. So not ancient empires.
No. Before he tackles ancient empires or legendary giants, he anchors his entire philosophy in the biological and psychological reality of human development.
Oh, okay. I'm fascinated. Walk me through that.
So he introduces a concept that translates to the shirk of upbringing.
Wait, shirk as in polytheism or associating partners with God.
Exactly.
Wow.
In his writings, every single creature is born into a state of absolute innate subservience to its parents.
Well, yeah, I want to look closely at that word subservience because in the context of a newborn, it's just a biological absolute.
It's survival.
Right. An infant's brain literally lacks the neural pathways to separate, like, food source from identity.
Right. They're one and the same to a baby.
But Dr. Waleed takes this physiological reality and he splits it, right,
Yeah.
into two very distinct categories of dependence.
He does. He's arguing that this isn't just about survival. He says it's about the construction of reality itself.
Okay.
So he divides this innate subservience into cognitive dependence and physical dependence.
Let's break those down. Start with cognitive.
So the cognitive or knowledge-based dependence, Dr. Waleed links this directly to the Quranic concept of iyyaka na'budu.
Which translates to, you alone we worship.
Yes. Now apply that to a newborn. The child relies entirely on the parents to understand the world.
Right, the parents literally dictate reality.
Exactly. They decide what is safe, what's dangerous, what constitutes truth, and what constitutes falsehood.
They provide the total cognitive framework for everything.
Yeah, for the infant, the parents are the ultimate, unquestionable source of all knowledge.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the second category is the physical dependence.
Right. And he links that to iyyaka nasta'in, or you alone we ask for help.
So that's the pure biological imperative. The child relies completely on the parents for physical protection and, sustenance.
Exactly. But taking those two concepts,
The total cognitive reliance and total physical reliance.
yes, taking those and mapping them onto the concept of worship leads to a highly provocative conclusion in his framework, which Dr. Waleed argues that because of this total dependence, a child is technically born into a state of polytheism, or mushrik.
Wow. So the mother or the parents basically act as the natural god to the child.
Right. And he is making a structural observation here, totally devoid of moral judgment.
Like it's not a sin for a baby to do this.
Exactly, no. The child simply does not have the capacity to comprehend any other provider or ultimate authority.
The parents just constitute the entire universe.
Yeah. Therefore, by the sheer virtue of being an infant, the child is essentially in a state of worship and complete reliance on an entity other than the creator.
Because the parents are the physical manifestation of providence.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. If I'm understanding the mechanics of this, it's very similar to how a fledgling bird imprints.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right. Like if a human feeds a baby bird, the bird's brain just hardwires itself to view that human as its parent.
Yeah, it completely overrides objective reality.
Exactly. It's not a conscious choice. It's just a hardwired survival mechanism. The danger isn't in the imprinting itself because, that's necessary to keep the bird alive.
Sure.
The friction comes when the bird needs to learn how to fly, right? But its brain is still tethered to a human who obviously cannot teach it to fly.
Right. The human is completely unequipped for that phase of the bird's life.
So at some point, the natural mechanism actually becomes a developmental prison.
That neural hardwiring is the perfect way to visualize it. This natural God phase is a necessary incubator, sure.
But it has a limit.
Yes, so Dr. Waleed emphasizes that it has a strict expiration date. It only lasts until the child is physically weaned and begins to cognitively mature.
And he uses a specific Arabic term for this maturity, doesn't he?
He does. He uses the term rushed, which signifies cognitive and spiritual maturity.
Okay, so rushed is essentially the exit strategy from this biological polytheism.
Precisely. According to Dr. Waleed, true faith, like conscious intellectual belief, can only begin when a person reaches rushed.
When they can actually think for themselves.
Right. This is the critical moment where an individual breaks that absolute physical and cognitive dependence on their parents.
They transition from the unthinking, innate subservience of childhood into a state where they can spiritually comprehend an ultimate truth.
Right, a truth beyond their immediate physical providers. They graduate from the shirk of upbringing into autonomous monotheism.
But, if human history has taught us anything, it's that power structures rarely surrender control voluntarily, right?
Oh, exactly. And this is where Dr. Waleed's framework turns incredibly dark.
Let's get into that. Because he argues that this natural, innocent dependence of childhood is systematically exploited.
Heavily exploited. The biological necessity for a child to trust its parents is literally weaponized.
Right. Parents, or just the broader societal structure they represent, they use that absolute cognitive power to draft the youth into ideological wars.
Yes. Well before the child has ever reached rushed, they intercept the transition entirely.
They recognize the immense power of that biological imprinting.
And rather than allowing the child to achieve cognitive independence, they artificially extend the subservience.
Which brings us to the central pillar of Dr. Waleed's linguistic reengineering.
Yes, the word imlak.
Okay, let's strip away the traditional narrative here because we need to look at what that word usually means.
Right.
Anyone familiar with ancient texts knows imlak is historically translated as poverty.
Yes, material poverty.
We've all heard the injunction, do not kill your children out of imlak. And the standard academic consensus has always framed this as a socioeconomic warning.
Like, don't commit infanticide just because you fear starvation or a lack of material resources.
Right. It's always been viewed as a literal physical tragedy.
But Dr. Waleed entirely rejects that socioeconomic interpretation.
He just throws it out completely.
Completely.
Yeah.
He strips the word of any association with material poverty, lack of wealth, or physical hunger.
So what does imlak mean to him?
He redefines imlak as forced subservience. In Arabic, al-tibleya al-khazriya.
Forced subservience.
Yes. Within his framework, imlak is the manifestation of immense arrogance, tyranny, and just the oppressive overreach of power.
Okay, wow, that completely rewrites the concept of killing your children.
It changes everything about that verse.
Yeah, because if Imlach has absolutely nothing to do with empty granaries or physical starvation, then what does it actually mean to kill a child out of forced subservience?
The mechanism here changes from physical murder to something deeply psychological.
The killing is ideological.
Exactly. The killing, Dr. Waleed describes, is the assassination of intellectual potential. It is ideological and spiritual death.
Oh, wow.
It occurs when a parent or a society takes that absolute innate trust to the infant, and rather than guiding the child
Towards maturity.
right, instead of that, they forcefully indoctrinate them. They suffocate the child's capacity for independent thought by locking them into manufactured demonic conflicts.
They force the youth to inherit their prejudices, rigid dogmas, and fabricated heritages.
Exactly. It's cognitive suffocation masquerading as parenting.
And Dr. Waleed places this psychological mechanism directly into the ancient historical timeline, doesn't he?
He does. He specifically argues that this forced subservience, this imlach, was utilized historically.
Right, by ancient Israelites.
Yes, in his framework, they forced their youth into ideological wars against righteous Arab human or Adamite believers.
So he's asserting that these historical conflicts were not fundamentally about territory or water rights or resources in the traditional sense.
No, not at all. They were about forcing the next generation to fight for a distorted idol.
A fabricated pagan heritage designed to just overwrite the original, pure, divine truth.
Exactly. The parents were essentially sacrificing their children's spiritual economy on the altar of an ideological idol.
Which is just, so what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Right.
It shifts the tragedy from a lack of physical resources, which is, often just an unavoidable circumstance of geography, or
Fine.
yeah, to a deliberate, calculated lack of intellectual freedom. It's about spiritual and cognitive hijacking.
He characterizes this as an alliance with Satan, really,
How so?
where the previous generation acts as an agent of spiritual death. They strip the youth of free will to maintain a state of blind, inherited hostility.
It's the systematic enslavement of the mind before it even has the capacity to form a question.
Exactly. And Dr. Waleed is constructing a fundamental dichotomy here, what he calls the covenant of subservience and sovereignty.
Okay, let's break down that dichotomy. On one side of this cosmic ledger, you have Imlach.
Right, this forced tyrannical subservience.
Right. So to balance the equation, he introduces a contrasting concept.
Yes, the word imla.
Imla versus Imlach.
Exactly. So imla represents voluntary, willing subservience.
Okay. So it's a choice.
Yes, it's the conscious, intellectual choice to follow a written covenant guided by God's light.
But crucial to his framework, Imla can only be achieved after one has reached rushed, right?
Absolutely. It requires maturity. It's an active exercise of free will.
So it's a submission to divine truth that comes from deep understanding, not from the fear instilled by a parent or, like, an oppressive society.
Exactly. Imla requires your eyes to be wide open.
Whereas Imlach is a trap.
Yes. It is blind conformity enforced by an authority figure who just refuses to let the child reach cognitive maturity.
So Dr. Waleed takes this linguistic dichotomy, right? And he applies it to a very specific phrase that appears in the texts.
Right. Kashet imlach.
Yeah. Let's deconstruct that phrase. Because under the traditional translation, kashet imlach simply means fear of poverty.
Right. But to maintain consistency within his framework, Dr. Waleed has to deconstruct the word kashya as well.
Okay, because usually kasha is understood as just a standard fear or apprehension.
Exactly. But Dr. Waleed, he traces it back to the linguistic root shaika.
Okay, wait. How does he pull shaika out of kasha? And what does that root actually signify in his methodology?
So he argues that the root shaika represents a deep, desperate desire to preserve and maintain an extended connection.
A connection to what?
Particularly a connection that is fading, obsolete, or illegitimate. It's the anxiety of a dying paradigm desperately trying to hold on to its power.
Wow. Okay, so if we synthesize these two redefined terms,
Let's do it.
if kasha is the desperate, anxious desire to maintain an unbroken, fading connection,
Yes.
and imlach is forced subservience to a false idol or arrogance,
Right.
then the phrase kashat imlach becomes something incredibly sinister. It isn't a starving farmer weeping because he can't feed his family.
No, it translates to pushing children into intellectual and spiritual death specifically in order to maintain an unbroken, oppressive connection to Satan and generational arrogance.
Wow. The older generation is terrified of losing their ideological grip.
Exactly. They see their false heritage fading, so they enforce Imlach on their children to forge a chain of intellectual captivity.
They are literally preserving their corrupt lineage by sacrificing the cognitive liberty of their youth.
That's exactly it.
You know, I look at that psychological mechanism and I immediately see the blueprint for modern high-control groups.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like a cult.
Exactly. When you look at how a cult operates, the primary directive is information control. You isolate the youth. You control their inputs.
Right.
You dictate what they can read, who they can associate with, and how they must process reality. The leadership instills this profound anxiety, this kashya of the outside world.
And why do they do that? Because they are terrified of losing the loyalty of the next generation.
Exactly. They enforce imlach, forced subservience, because if the youth ever reached rush...
If they achieved cognitive independence.
Right. If that happened, the artificial authority of the cult would instantly collapse. It is the calculated engineering of forced loyalty born entirely out of the leadership's insecurity.
That's a perfect modern analogy. And Dr. Waleed is arguing that this mechanism of ideological tyranny is the hidden engine of ancient history.
You enforce subservience to preserve a corrupt lineage of thought.
Exactly. And once he establishes this mechanism, he uses it as a scalpel to just dissect the historical and anthropological record.
He doesn't just redefine concepts. He redefines the physical actors of antiquity.
He really does.
Which is wild, because if the underlying motivations of history have been entirely mistranslated...
Right. If poverty was actually forced cognitive subservience...
then the individuals fighting these wars cannot be who we thought they were.
No, they can't. Dr. Waleed asserts that the traditional narrative, which he views as a heavy distortion influenced by early Israelite traditions, completely inverted the identities of good and evil.
He claims that righteous, enlightened figures were deliberately painted as monsters, while oppressive tyrants were elevated.
Yes.
Let's look at the mechanics of how he reclaims the ancients, starting with the Nephilim, because that's a big one.
Oh, the Nephilim presents one of the most drastic paradigm shifts in Dr. Waleed's text.
Set the stage for us. What is the standard view?
In standard mythological and historical scholarship, the Nephilim are universally depicted as fallen angels, or the monstrous hybrid offspring of celestial beings and human women.
Right. They're always characterized by gigantism, corruption. They're often cited as the corrupting force that necessitated the Great Flood.
Exactly. They're the ultimate villains of the ancient world.
But Dr. Waleed completely rejects that mythology. How does he dismantle a concept so deeply embedded in the historical consensus?
He applies his linguistic framework to identify the Nephilim not as fallen monsters, but as al-Anfal.
Al-Anfal, what does that mean?
He defines al-Anfal as pure heavenly messengers.
Wait, pure messengers?
Yes. In his view, these were prophets sent directly by God, tasked with guiding humanity toward truth and that voluntary subservience we discussed earlier, imla.
That is a staggering inversion. He is taking beings traditionally viewed as the apex of corruption and recasting them as the apex of divine purity.
It flips the script entirely.
What is his mechanism for this? Like, how did pure messengers get remembered as monstrous giants?
Dr. Waleed argues that this was a deliberate smear campaign by the proponents of imlach.
The oppressive authorities?
Exactly. If an authority relies on forced subservience and distorted pagan heritage to maintain power, the greatest threat to that power is a pure messenger delivering uncorrupted divine truth.
Because they could not defit the message intellectually, they assassinated the messengers historically.
Exactly. They labeled them as fallen, aberrant monsters to obscure the truth they were trying to deliver.
Ensuring the population would fear them rather than listen to them.
Right.
It's the ultimate ad hominem attack etched right into the historical record. If you can convince the population that the person offering them intellectual freedom is actually a demon, the population will police itself.
They will run back to the safety of imlach.
Wow. Okay, what about the second group, the Gibborim?
The Gibborim are traditionally translated as the mighty. In standard texts, they are viewed as the ancient, towering, indigenous Canaanite inhabitants of Palestine.
They're the terrifying giants that the Israelites encountered, right? The ones who made the scouts feel like grasshoppers in their own sight.
Yes, that's the standard story.
They're always framed as the external, monstrous other that must be conquered to claim the land. But Dr. Waleed shifts the origin of the Gibborim entirely, doesn't he?
He does. He states that the Gibborim were absolutely not the indigenous Adamite Canaanites.
Then who were they?
He redefines the Gibberim as the militaristic, bloodshedding factions from among the Israelites themselves.
Wait, from among them?
Yes. He identifies them directly with Magog. Within his framework, the Gibberim were the internal forces that utilized brutal military might and violence to force their falsehoods upon the people.
They were the physical enforcers of Imlach.
Exactly.
So the people who wrote the history, or at least the people who influenced the traditional narrative, took their own oppressive militaristic wing, their own internal brutality, and they projected it onto the indigenous people they were displacing.
Yes, they took the label of the terrifying enemy and slapped it onto the victims.
That is historical gaslighting on a massive scale.
He argues it is a classic projection tactic used by tyrannical forces. By painting the indigenous population as the terrifying, mighty Gibberim, they retroactively justify their own militaristic aggression against them.
Which perfectly sets up the third massive redefinition in Dr. Waleed's text. Because if the Gibberim were projecting their own violence outward, it completely changes how we view their eternal enemies, the Amalekites. Who were they really fighting?
The Amalekites represent a fascinating linguistic shift in this philosophy. Historically and theologically, the Amalekites are understood as a specific, literal, ancient tribal bloodline.
Right. They are depicted as the perennial, mortal, genetic enemies of the Israelites against whom absolute perpetual war was decreed.
But Dr. Waleed argues that reading Amalekite as a noun, as a genetic lineage, is a fundamental linguistic failure.
So it's not a tribe.
Exactly. He argues that Amalekite is an adjective.
An adjective.
Yes, it's a descriptive behavioral term for anyone, regardless of their genetic background or geographic origin, who seeks power through immense arrogance, oppression, and tyranny.
So it's a behavior, not a bloodline.
Right. He labels them the deviant giants. To be an Amalekite in Dr. Waleed's framework is not about your DNA. It's about your methodology.
Meaning you are an enforcer of Imlach. You operate through towering arrogance and the forced subservience of others.
Exactly.
This dismantles the justification for perpetual warfare based on bloodline. Dr. Waleed is stating that the traditional narrative took a behavioral adjective, a spiritual sickness of tyrannical arrogance, and capitalized it.
They turned a descriptor into a proper noun,
creating a fabricated enemy tribe to justify endless conflict against anyone who opposed their forced ideology.
Yes, and Dr. Waleed takes all these abstracted historical and linguistic inversions.
Pure messengers recast as monsters, internal militarism projected onto indigenous victims, and behavioral descriptors turned into bloodlines.
Right, he takes all of that, and he forces them to collide in one specific, famous historical narrative.
The ultimate showdown.
Yes, he uses the clash between Goliath and Talut as the ultimate proving ground for his entire philosophy.
Now, in the Western tradition, we know Talut as Saul, but Dr. Waleed specifically uses the Quranic name Talut and anchors him to an entirely different historical figure.
Right.
Let's look at the two sides of this showdown. On one side, we have Goliath, known in the Arabic texts as Jalut. How does Goliath function within this inverted map of history?
Goliath, or Jalut, is the absolute embodiment of the Amalekite adjective. He's the prime example of the deviant giant.
But his gigantism isn't just physical, right?
No, Dr. Waleed is meticulous here. Goliath's gigantism is not merely about physical stature or biological anomalies. His gigantism is his towering, suffocating arrogance. Goliath represents the brutal physical enforcement of Imlach. He's the ultimate tyrant attempting to force subservience on a population through violence, intimidation, and raw, oppressive power.
Because he believes sovereignty is achieved through dominance and the hoarding of material strength. He is the apex predator of the false map. He demands that everyone operate under forced cognitive and physical subservience.
Exactly.
So if Goliath is the ultimate avatar of Imlach, who is the counterforce, how does Dr. Waleed frame Talut?
Dr. Waleed connects Talut directly to Ptolemy. He translates the name Talut as the tall man.
Wait, if Goliath is the giant, how is Talut the tall man? I mean, is it just two physically massive figures fighting each other?
No, because in Dr. Waleed's framework, the two men are operating on entirely different metrics of reality.
Okay, explain that.
The traditional narrative notes that Talut was initially rejected by the established Israelite elite because he lacked vast material wealth.
Right. They were judging his fitness for leadership by the metric of gold, physical dominance, and enforced power, the very metrics of Imlach.
They wanted a king who reflected their own materialistic, oppressive worldview. But Dr. Waleed points out that Talut was elevated based on a divine metric. He possessed what the Quran describes as a vastness or abundance.
Mm-hmm.
The specific Arabic word is basta in knowledge and physical presence.
So Talut was tall, not in the brute, monstrous, arrogant sense of Goliath.
No, he was tall in wisdom. He had an intellectual expanse, a profound grasp of true voluntary enlightenment.
His sovereignty was derived from deep knowledge and understanding Imla, not from forced subservience or hoarded wealth.
Exactly. It's a clash of fundamental metrics.
Goliath demands obedience by weaponizing fear and physical might. Talut inspires voluntary allegiance by offering the vastness of knowledge and spiritual truth.
Right. And Dr. Waleed introduces a third critical figure into this dynamic, David.
Right. But he completely strips away the traditional identity of David as the Israelite shepherd boy, doesn't he?
Yes. David's classification in Dr. Waleed's text is highly specific and drastically different. He classifies David explicitly as a Palestinian Arab Canaanite Adamite commander.
Wow. That is a total recalibration of the historical stage. In this framework, David isn't an underdog from the same lineage as the elite who rejected Talut. He is an indigenous commander.
Yes. In Dr. Waleed's framework, David is a righteous Adamite commander who aligns himself with Talut, the man of expansive knowledge, or Basta.
Together, they represent the forces of Imla.
Exactly. They are fighting to liberate the population from Goliath's oppressive Imlak, from that forced ideological and physical enslavement.
It's the indigenous Adamite hero and the sovereign of knowledge joining forces against the Amalekite tyrant of arrogance.
That is the core conflict.
You know, when you look at the architecture of this showdown, it isn't a historical skirmish in a valley anymore.
No, it's so much bigger than that.
In Dr. Waleed's philosophy, this is the ultimate manifestation of the cosmic war he's been detailing from the very first concept of infant subservience.
Plus,
It is the clash between the false metric of material wealth, biological arrogance, and forced intellectual captivity enforced by the deviant giants.
versus the true metric of expansive knowledge, intellectual freedom, and voluntary enlightenment represented by the tall man.
Exactly. Dr. Waleed's framework asserts that throughout human history, sovereignty has been falsely claimed and violently guarded by those who rely on materialism and intellectual suppression.
And he has a specific phrase for that reliance on the material world, doesn't he?
He elegantly refers to it as the lowing of the calf, drawing a direct line back to the worship of the golden calf idol.
Meaning they claim power through enforced dogma and wealth.
Right. But his ultimate thesis is that true, lasting, and righteous sovereignty belongs exclusively to those who possess best an expansive grasp of knowledge, truth, and the capacity for voluntary submission.
When you pull all of these incredibly dense threads together, Dr. Waleed is really presenting a unified theory of human struggle.
He is.
It's a war over the map of reality. It's a war of wills. Who gets to decide what you believe? Is your reality forced upon you by an arrogant authority that is terrified of losing its connection to a corrupt past? Or do you actively, voluntarily seek out the vastness of knowledge? And he's challenging the reader to recognize that the primary tools of historical oppression are not swords or chariots.
No, the most devastating weapons are redefined words, distorted origins, and manipulated histories that lock a population into a state of cognitive imlac.
Right. As long as a population operates under forced subservience to a false narrative, they are prevented from ever reaching true spiritual maturity. Rushed.
And that brings the weight of this entire philosophy directly to you listening right now.
It does.
Because every single one of us starts out exactly like that infant we discussed at the very beginning. We are biologically fundamentally dependent.
We all absorb the imlac, the encouraged narratives, the cultural biases, and the historical maps of the world around us.
Exactly. Our parents, our educational systems, our societies, they hand us a map and they dictate, this is the world. This is who the monsters are. This is who the heroes are.
But if Dr. Waleed's framework proves anything, it's that reaching true maturity achieving Rushed requires you to look at that inherited map and question the legend.
It requires transitioning from the unthinking biological acceptance of your upbringing and actively choosing your own imla, the voluntary pursuit of truth.
Based on an expansive, critical examination of knowledge, rather than mere capitulation to inherited tradition.
Which leaves us with a deeply provocative thought to carry away from Dr. Khaled Waleed's intense, paradigm-shifting framework today.
What's that?
Well, if history possesses the sheer power to completely flip the definitions of fundamental human concepts, if it can engineer poverty into forced cognitive arrogance, if it can recast pure messengers as corrupt monsters, and if it can brand the pursuit of intellectual freedom as rebellion, then you have to interrogate your own map.
You really do.
Look at the convictions you defend most fiercely. What core foundational belief are you holding on to today simply because it was dictated to you, forced upon you by the sheer gravity of your upbringing, rather than something you truly, consciously chose to learn, dissect, and understand for yourself?
That's the real question. Are you operating under forced subservience, or have you charted your own course to knowledge?
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly dense deep dive into Dr. Waleed's revolutionary architecture. Keep questioning the map.